Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com, has been all over the Flyers from all year long through the pandemic, now into the bubble, and now coming into this pivotal game versus Tampa. Kevin, how you doing on this exciting Saturday?
I'm doing great, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing great, too, because you know what? The Flyers are the best team in Philadelphia, hands down, of all the four teams. And I think that this game tonight, win or lose, is going to be a great opportunity for this team to learn about themselves. Going against a Tampa team, even without Steven Stamkos, this is the kind of like to me, a measuring stick game for the Fly guys.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think that it's kind of ironic how this was the game that was on the schedule when the NHL paused for the Flyers. They were in Tampa that afternoon. The league shuts down. The pause starts. And that's who they were supposed to face. And it was a measuring stick then, and it's going to be a measuring stick now. Just because this will determine a lot for the rest of the playoffs. I mean, there's a lot of people who have watched the round-robin games to an extent and then watched some of the qualifying rounds as well. And as they look at all of these teams playing and how they've looked in returning, there's a lot of people that think that this has the potential to be an Eastern Conference final preview. That's how good the Flyers have looked. That's how good Tampa Bay has looked. And you're going to get to see both of them out there at the same time. And this is really going to be the big test for the Flyers. This is the one that, you know, win or lose, it's not the biggest deal in the world. They're going to be a top 2 seed no matter what. But if they can come away with a win in this game and beat a team like Tampa, it's going to show a lot about the potential of this team this year, and it'll just add fuel to the already growing fire that is with the way that the Flyers are being viewed around not just the city, but the league as well.
Now, let's touch on the win or lose scenarios. So how do the Flyers, in your opinion, beyond this game, match up with the potential scenario? So if I understand, if they win the game, they would play the Canadiens, and then if they lose the game, they play the winner of Columbus and Toronto. So how do the Flyers match up with those three teams?
Yeah, and it's funny because we almost had more clarity on the situation. We were about 20 seconds away from finding out whether, you know, win it would have been Montreal, lose it would have been Columbus, and that was the end of it. And that wild finish to the Columbus-Toronto game that forces a Game 5 turns this whole thing around. So the Flyers could technically be waiting until tomorrow night to find out who they're playing. In terms of matchups, it's tough because I think that every team that's going to make it to this point that gets past the qualifiers and gets to the first round is going to be a tough matchup no matter what. I mean, Montreal just took down the 5 seed in Pittsburgh, and that's the highest points percentage team that's been eliminated from the playoffs. The Flyers were ranked 6th in points percentage out of the pause. Pittsburgh was number 7, and there was really only 2 regulation losses difference between the two. And they lasted 4 games, and their season's over. And Montreal was the last team that crossed the line. They were a 500 points percentage team. They were the 24th ranked team out of the 24 that made this trip to the hub cities. And they're going to be tough, especially when you got a guy like Carey Price in net, no question about it. The Columbus and Toronto matchup is very intriguing. I think Columbus was looking like a tough matchup on the surface. I think especially as they looked like they were going to finish off Game 4 with no problem. And Toronto's rally now would make me worry about Toronto. Because if Toronto can win Game 5 too and basically come back from being on life support to winning a series in 5 games, they're going to have a ton of momentum out of that series. Columbus is probably thinking in the back of their mind what could go wrong in Game 5 after everything went wrong down the stretch of Game 4. They're frustrated. They're disappointed they didn't close out that game. And even if they win Game 5, I think that thought carries some weight going into the first round, that they had to even play a Game 5 to get there. So I think that Toronto's the team to watch out for the most, and the other two are probably a little bit lower on the chain. I think Montreal's going to have a tougher time keeping up with one of these round-robin teams. There's something about Pittsburgh that just didn't look right from the start. I think that played a factor as well. But ultimately, I think the key is that the Flyers keep playing their game. If the Flyers keep playing their game, focus on themselves, and play the way they've played these 2 round-robin games, hopefully 3 after tonight so far, then they should be able to at least compete in every single series that they play. And, you know, this jumps from 5 to 7, too, from 5 games to 7 games. So the longer series probably doesn't bode as well for those teams that had to treat every game in these qualifiers like life or death. And the longer the series lasts, the longer it plays out. I think the more it's going to hurt a team that had to play in a 5-game series before this.
I know it's not a sexy topic for some people, but to me, I think one of the most important things for the Flyers' success has been their defense. The fact that this is a team that has gone out there and limited every team they've played against in terms of their ability to score. And they're not doing it against, pushovers. They're doing it against the Bruins. They're doing it against the Capitals. They're shutting down guys who should be out there getting tons of shots and tons of scoring opportunities. I think this is a high caliber defense, Kevin, that is going to be the key to their success. Because to me, I don't think we talk enough about defense in hockey.
Yeah, I don't think we do either, honestly. I mean, I feel like that was the thing that got Washington a Stanley Cup a couple of years ago. I know that they have the high-powered offense. You think of Ovechkin, you think of Oshie, you think of Backstrom, you think of Kuznetsov, but their defense is really good, and it's defense from the group as a collective unit. It's not just the six defensemen that take the ice. It's the forwards too. It's having that willingness to play on the back end and create from that. I think the key with the Flyers is that not only do they have six defensemen and a little bit more depth beyond that really lends itself to the defensive play, but when your top center is Sean Couturier, who's one of the best two-way centers in the game. Kevin Hayes has clearly proved he's not a pushover as a two-way center either. He's been excellent this year, and especially excellent in the last couple of games. And then you keep going down the line. I mean, Scott Lawton was playing center for a time. Now he's on the wing on the second line. He's a good two-way player. There's a lot of guys who buy into that two-way play, and it turns into their offense. And that's the big thing. I think the Flyers have been truly one of the qualities of an Alain Vigneault team, which is opportunistic when it comes to their scoring chances. They take advantage of miscues on the other end by playing stifling defense and turn it into offense. That's been probably the biggest turnaround so far. And like you said, there's 3 games into the bubble so far, the exhibition and the 2 round robins, and they've allowed 4 total goals in the entire stretch so far. That goes way above and beyond, I think, what we would have expected coming out of a 4.5 month pause. So if they can keep that up, continue to play the solid defensive play, get the goaltending too, because you can't put it past it. Both Carter Hart and Brian Elliott have been sharp since they've returned as well. You get the goaltending, you get the solid defensive play, you keep taking advantage of the opportunities on the offensive side, and you're going to be a successful team, and you're going to make a pretty decent run if you keep doing all 3 of those things.
Kevin Durso joining us here on the Boardwalk kind of Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure to follow him on Twitter for all your hockey and Flyers coverage at Kevin_Durso on Twitter. Check out his preview right now at 973ESPN.com. You mentioned Washington, and I don't think it's a coincidence that a guy who was on that Washington team when they won the Cup a couple of years ago is now on the team playing on the defensive line, and that is Matt Niskanen. So what is the impact of Niskanen been, in your opinion, not just on the play of the team on defense, but also how he's influenced the other guys on defense as well?
Yeah, he's been huge, and it was interesting to see because he came when he got traded to Philadelphia. He had what on paper it's a bad contract. It feels like it's expensive. He's an aging player. He was coming off of a couple of down years. It felt like a bad trade, honestly, on the surface. A lot of people didn't like it. And yet he's come in and proved to be one of the most valuable players that this team has. First of all, I think he balances Ivan Provorov really well. He lets Ivan Provorov be that hybrid defenseman that jumps up in the play, can make things happen on the offensive side, and then still plays that solid defensive game. And, for Niskanen to be that calming presence and that veteran leader for a guy like Provorov, who's turning into a leader himself. And, when Niskanen comes out and says something about Provorov, that's not only calling him a stud, but then sits there and says that he was quoted, the old fart next to him will try to keep up. It's comical to a sense because he says it, but he has really kept up all year. And he's done a really good job throughout. And I think that their performance rubs off on the other pairings as well. I think when you got a pairing that's young like Travis Sanheim and Phil Myers, and a guy like Matt Niskanen's there to kind of be a guide for other pairings too, it just goes a long way. And Niskanen's a guy who plays in all situations, so he's part of that improved penalty kill. He gets some power play time. He's got the playoff experience now that's going to help this team too. So he really becomes a valuable piece when you think about how he's been part of a run that's made it to the finish line. He's got the playoff experience. He's got the overall NHL experience that helps him be a guide for these players and these young defensemen, especially as they continue to grow. And it goes a long way at this time of year.
Speaking of the young defenseman, I know that Gostisbehere is going to be back in the lineup, and he's back in for Robert Haig. So, what should we read or not read into that move?
I don't think there's too much to read into it. Alain Vigneault said he's wanted to get Shane Gostisbehere into a game especially during the round robin for some time now. I think the first two games didn't really warrant any changes, quite honestly. They played Boston really well, and then they went into Washington. I think you were going to keep everything the same. Now that you're kind of really playing with house money here, you've already moved up 2 seeds from the 4 to the 2 at minimum. You can get the 1 if you win. And, Gostisbehere has had a pretty strong camp. He looks good in the exhibition. His mobility looks better. And, one of the areas that hasn't looked so good for the team is the power play. Maybe you stick a guy who can inject some life into the power play in some capacity. You put a guy who's known as a power play specialist into your lineup, and maybe that gets it going. The game against Washington had a lot of special teams play. Flyers had 6 power plays. 2 of them were abbreviated, but still they went 0 for 6. And that's not a good look at playoff time. You got to take advantage of those opportunities. And putting Gostisbehere in may help, especially when you have to shift over to the second unit. You won't see much change from the first unit realistically, but the second unit you'll see Gostisbehere out there probably, and that'll hopefully make a difference for the team, because that's the one area of their game I think they need to really get going. And I think they want to see him at 5-on-5 too. They want to see if he's not only got the mobility going against a really tough team in Tampa, but they also want to see him try to play on the defensive end, see if there's anything that indicates that he can still play there and not be a liability on the defensive side, and maybe help this team in a playoff race. I think on paper everybody would put a guy like Shane Gostisbehere in your top 6, no question about it. But I don't think there's been anything that warranted the change. Robert Haig's been really good, and the team was playing solid with him. And this might be Gostisbehere's chance to prove that they can still, he can help them win and keep everything rolling the way it was before the pause and like it has been so far since they came back. And maybe this helps him crack the lineup once the playoffs actually start for them.
Let's also touch on some of the other changes for tonight. Voracek is not available for the game. Is there anything further information-wise with that, or is it just kind of like, mum's the word with Voracek?
It's mum's the word. Alain Vigneault basically is told us that he can't disclose much more than he's not available. I don't think it's anything serious. I don't think anybody made it seem like it was anything serious. There's been a couple of things that kind of come to mind with Voracek. He missed a scrimmage back early on in Phase 3, and it had to do with a delayed test. That comes to your mind. The other thing is that, very early in that game against Washington, he took a high stick. So maybe this is just precautionary. I think the goal for the Flyers is to try to get out of this game as much as they would probably want to win it and try to, get that 1 seed. Knowing they've locked up at least the top 2, I think the goal is also to get out of this game as healthy as possible. And if that means you can rest a guy like Voracek for a game and not worry about his health and know he'll be ready to go when the playoffs actually start next week, then maybe you take the opportunity to do it. I think one of the things the Flyers have done well with their lineups, especially in that Washington game, when you pulled James Van Riemsdyk out of the lineup as a coach's decision and put Connor Bunnaman in, nothing against Connor Bunnaman, and he's played well as a rookie, but he's a 4th-round pick who is in his rookie year, and James Van Riemsdyk's a veteran who has playoff experience and has been there before. And you basically, to a sense, by interchanging a couple of guys, prove that you can win without the most optimal lineup that you can put down on paper. And that's a big step for this team, too. The more you can play these games and maybe win without this piece or that piece. They played without Michael Rossel for a game now, and they've won. You played without James Van Riemsdyk and won. If you can play without Jake Voracek and win, too, that would be an indicator that this team can still reel off wins while missing a key player. And that would go a really long way in the playoffs as well, to just showing people how tough and how deep this team can be.
Now, before we get to JVR, I thought it was interesting that they moved Joe Farabee to the top line to replace Voracek. So what kind of opportunities is for Farabee to show, his kind of impact he can have on this kind of game, not just tonight, but on the Flyers lineup in general moving forward?
This is an opportunity for him to show even more than he did in the last game. I think when he got put on the third line against Washington, you saw a good chemistry between him and Nick Aube-Kubel, and a couple of times where either of them could have finished scoring chances. They had a couple of odd man rushes. Farabee was stopped on one. Aube-Kubel was stopped on another. Farabee probably could have come away out of that game with at least 2 points, realistically, with how well he was playing on that line. And this is an opportunity maybe for him to not only show what he can do with players like Claude Giroux and Sean Couturier, but maybe to get to finish on those opportunities as well. And so I think this is another opportunity for him to show what he has and to show how good of a fit he can be in this lineup, because he already was showing something on the third line. Now you're going to put him with even more talent. And not only that, but a line that hasn't produced any points so far in the 2 round robin games. They were they were more active in that first game, that exhibition. Couturier had a goal, Drew had an assist, but since then they've been off the score sheet. And maybe this is a way to not only try to let Joel Farabee get an opportunity to get on the score sheet, but also for the other two to be able to have another guy who has a knack for going to the net and has the ability to finish, even though, he's a rookie, so it's still coming to him, but he's got the ability to finish, and maybe that'll help the other two get on the board as well.
I want to touch on JVR with you as well, Kevin, because he's such an interesting situation because we know how phenomenally talented he is. We know what he's capable of, not just as a scorer, but an all-around wing. But it almost seems like Vigneault was almost, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, you let me know. It almost looked like Vigneault was kind of sending a message to him saying, we don't need you, so you need to pick up your game to what you're capable of to be in this lineup.
I don't think you're too far off. I don't think it was a message that says we don't need you, but I do think a message was sent, and it was a message received, too, by Van Riemsdyk on his part. I think what ended up, Alain Vigneault had said just the day before the Washington game that he expected more out of Van Riemsdyk, and you saw the signs kind of coming into play there. He was demoted to the fourth line. He was on a rotation on the fourth line with Bunneman, so it almost was kind of a which one of those two is going to be out of the lineup. And when he didn't take the line rushes in the warm-up and all of a sudden it's Van Riemsdyk's the guy out and Bunneman's the guy who's in, that opens a lot of eyes. It's a big indicator of how Alain Vigneault's not going to put up with anything if you're not delivering to his expectations and you're not giving what he thinks that you should be giving to the team. And I do think it was a message received. He gets back in the lineup today against Tampa, and he'll play on the third line again with Derek Brandt and Nick Aube-Kubel, and we'll see what happens out of that. Hopefully the message was really received and it shows in his performance. I hope that that's the case because, the Flyers are a better team with James Van Riemsdyk on the ice. He's got the finishing ability, and if he plays with the right guys and can play with some guys who can set him up the right way, he can still be a big goal scorer for this team. And especially when they're on the power play, I think he can still contribute there in a big way. He just got to really show that effort and that energy to do it. And I think that there was some bit of a letdown from him in the first few days of camp once they got to Toronto. And that's what Alain Vigneault was looking for. He wanted to see that improvement, and that's why he didn't play on Thursday. It was as simple as that. And that's what they're looking for from him now. So he'll get back in, and hopefully the message is received, and he comes out much more energetic and much better this time around.
Flyers versus Tampa tonight. You can hear it right here on 97.3 ESPN. Coverage begins at 8 o'clock. Kevin Durso joining us on the Boardwalk on the hotline. Our Flyers insider. Follow him on Twitter at Kevin_Durso for all your Flyers and NHL coverage. Before we get to the rest of the NHL bubble, I wanted to touch specifically on the matchup tonight with you about this element. So the two times the Flyers have played Lightning this year, Lightning won 1-0. Lightning won the other game 5-3. So we know the Flyers have been competitive with them both times. In your mind, what is the biggest difference in the Flyers team as of right now on August 8th versus when they played Tampa back in January and February?
Both teams at the time of those matchups were on pretty hot streaks at that point. The Flyers were just starting in January. They were starting to turn a corner, and they played 4 really emotional games in a row. They played Washington and won. They had that 1-0 loss against Tampa, and then they beat Boston and St. Louis in back-to-back games. And that was really saying a lot about where that team was coming after a really bad road trip. The Flyers weren't probably at their best technically in that game against Tampa. They played a really solid game, but they were not too far removed from that really poor road trip. And I think that was a good showing when you look at where they were at that time. When they played them in February, I think you expected more from them. I think that was a much more disappointing showing because they fell behind pretty early in that game. I think it was 3-0 in the first period, and they got 1 goal back, and they were starting to press more in the third period, down by 2. It looked like they would, if they could just get 1 goal, they might find a way to tie it up, and they actually gave up the next goal. They were down 4-1, and then they really put together a crazy rally that almost came to completion. And it's, I think that was more representative. Somehow that's more representative of the team we're going to see today because they were in the middle of a hot streak. They are able to strike quickly. I think that's going to be the team that you want to have show up and just play a tighter defensive game against a team that has a lot of firepower. I mean, even without Steven Stamkos tonight, Tampa Bay's got a lot of firepower and quite frankly, hasn't shown it yet in any of their round-robin games. You got nobody on the team with more than 1 goal and 2 points in these 2 round-robin games. They've played 2 games that had 3-2 finals. One of them was in a shootout. One of them took a late regulation goal to get the regulation win against Boston. So this is a team that I think still hasn't broken out yet offensively, kind of like the Flyers to an extent. I mean, the Flyers have 7 goals so far in the round-robin, but they haven't quite broken out offensively with the best players delivering at such a high rate. And I'd be worried about Tampa Bay, especially if they didn't get the special teams rolling with, Kucherov and Braden Point and all those guys who have the ability to deliver and step up even in the absence of Stamkos. Those are the guys I'd be worried about the most. So I think that the key is defensively. It's still defensively playing as well as they have in these first 2 games. And the Flyers had a very good defensive game against them back in January. So they can do it. It's just a matter of silencing this team and all of their firepower at the same time.
Of course, you hear all the action tonight. 8 o'clock, 97.3 ESPN. Also, keep it tuned to Kevin Durso at Kevin_Durso on Twitter for coverage before the game, during the game, and after the game. Kevin, I want to kind of go around to some of the rest of the games because this entire week has been hockey overload in a good way. It's been absolutely incredible. Some of these matchups, though, some of the results are surprising a lot of people. One of them that was not surprising I wanted to start with, though, was how Carolina just was like a Mack truck and just ran right over the Rangers. I thought when Lundqvist was going to start game 1, I was like, oh, maybe the Rangers can pick up a little energy from Lundqvist getting back in the lineup. And it's like the Hurricanes didn't care. And the final 2 games just didn't feel competitive at all. It seems like Brindamore's got this Carolina team firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I don't know how much of that was Carolina looking that good or just the Rangers that didn't look that good, honestly, in the series. I think I gave the Rangers probably a little too much credit. I thought that was going to be a longer series.
I did too, Kevin. It's not just you.
Yeah, because I thought the Rangers were playing really well going into the pause, and I expected a little bit more from them, especially when you've got a guy like Artemi Panarin on your roster. Mika Zibanejad was scoring at an outrageous rate at that time when the pause happened. But Carolina's got a really good team, and they attack with speed, and that's their thing. I think they make up for a lot of because on paper they don't have the best goaltending situation. I think a lot of people know that, but I think they make up for a lot with their speed and the way they attack the game, and they don't give up a lot of quality chances, and that can help you big time when you may not have the best goalie in net. And, I think you just look at the 2, they got a dynamic duo forming, and they're a young dynamic duo, Sebastian Aho and Andrei Svechnikov. Those 2 are going to be superstars in the league if they aren't already. Aho's becoming one, and Svechnikov's going to be something special down the road too. I think he's got a ton of potential, and he's a joy to watch. He's an excellent player, and he's an incredibly skilled player. And that's really the duo that you have to watch out for the most. That both of them took over 2 of the 3 games essentially, and that's what you have to watch out for with that team. They're really good, and Rod Brindamore's a great coach for this team, especially for how young they are.
I know in also another series, the Islanders, Panthers, a lot of people focused a lot on, Barry Trotz versus Joel Quenneville, 2 of the old guard coaches. But at least with my 2 eyes, it looked like the Islanders were just a better team overall. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yeah, I think the Islanders have 2 things that did the Florida Panthers in that series. And I think it was, first of all, they're a better team defensively as a whole. That's Barry Trotz's style, for one. And I think the Islanders just have better all-around players. I don't think they have a ton of skill guys. Matt Barzal's a very talented player, and he's got a lot of skill. But I think they got a lot of guys who do a lot of things really well. Beauvillier had a really strong series, and, Brock Nelson is a really solid player for them. Anders Lee is a good player for them. Josh Bailey. They've got a good list of forwards. And it wasn't really a surprise to me that they won that series. Again, I think I gave Florida a little bit too much credit there with Bobrovsky in goal, with Quenneville coaching, with a good top line. I thought it was going to go it had a shot maybe to go 5, I thought, actually. But, it was the Islanders just proved to be too much for them in that series in 4 games.
The one series I will personally take credit for, because I told you and Hunter about this way before the games even started, but as soon as I saw the Canadiens versus the Penguins, I started screaming Carey Price. But I know it was more than just Price that won them that series. So give the audience some more information about the talent on Montreal, because they do have some really talented forwards on that team.
Yeah, they do, and I think you alluded to it yesterday talking about it too, where there's not a name that a lot of casual fans would know on that team. It's Carey Price, and it's seemingly for the casual fan, probably a bunch of other guys. They really don't. There's not many who stand out. Max Domi's a very talented forward, though, and even in that series, I don't think Domi was anywhere near the best player for that team. I think yesterday, the guy who scored the game-winning goal for them, the only goal into while Tristan Jarry was still in net, was Arturi Lehkonen. I thought he was probably the best forward that they had in the game. He was the one who was buzzing around the net the most. Jonathan Drouin is very talented as well, and he bounced back pretty strongly after missing on the penalty shot in game one, and in overtime of all things too, and ended up scoring a goal in one of the wins as well. And they got contributions from their defense too. You got to give them that. Shea Weber still produces offensively. Jeff Petrie had 2 game-winning goals in the series. That goes a long way too. So they're going to be a tough team because they're rallying around each other right now, and that they showed it in that 4-game series. I mean, Pittsburgh really did not get much going in that game at all. It wasn't just Carey Price playing a solid game yesterday. It was a total team effort defensively to shut down 2 of the best players in the world. We all know it too. I mean, that's Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, who were really held at bay throughout the series, and that says a lot.
This Toronto-Columbus series has been absolutely nuts, Kevin, and they have 2 straight games that go to overtime, and they win in overtime. I don't know how they're going to outdo it tomorrow when they play Game 5. But to me, one of the biggest things in this series has been when Seth Jones plays well, Columbus plays well. When he's not having a good game, it seems like he's the catalyst that makes them go. And I feel like that Tortorella can scream all he wants, but to me, Jones is the key if Columbus is going to beat Toronto tomorrow.
Yeah, he's definitely their top defenseman, and Zach Werenski's a very talented defenseman who's becoming a top player on that team too. But Seth Jones is still the guy who makes it go. And they've got a lot of young forwards. They're a young team, and it's kind of a weird dynamic to the Carolina situation we just talked about with the way their team's built up. It's a young team with a head coach who's still on the relatively young side as well, because Brendan Moore doesn't have a ton of experience as a head coach. You got John Tortorella as your head coach in Columbus with a ton of experience, Hall of Fame credentials. He's won a Stanley Cup. He's in the top 10 in coaching wins. And, he's a guy who he's a guy who demands a lot of his players, and they're young players who, he's going to make an impression on them in some way. So, Seth Jones has had to put up with him probably longer than a lot of the other guys on that team. And that says a lot about him and how he's played for that team and how he's stayed with it. And, when they lost him to injury, and they've had to do this multiple times, they've lost him to injury for long term, it makes a difference when you play them. And that's an interesting dynamic if the Flyers were to play that team, by the way, is that when they played them in a back-to-back twice in February, they had a home-and-home against them, they were missing a lot of these pieces. Seth Jones was still out at that point in time, and there was a lot of forwards that were missing from the lineup too. So it's a different team. They've got the talent to be able to pull off the win in the series, no question about it. I mean, they were 4 minutes away from winning the series last night, and then Toronto just turned it on all at the same time. 3 quick goals, and I almost wonder if it brings into question not just their defensive play, but their goaltending too. I mean, they switched goalies halfway through that 3-0 comeback of their own the night before, and here's a guy who had never played in the playoffs before, coming into a game cold, down 3-0, and then making his first start the next night, and then losing a 3-0 lead with under 5 minutes to play, and then losing the game. It's been a wild series, and maybe the best thing, especially because by the time this game happens tomorrow night, we'll know if the Flyers won or lost and have the 1 or 2 seed. If they have the 2 seed, let's say, and they're getting the winner of this game, you want this game to be as tough as it can be and to go maybe as long as it can be, because you'd want these 2 teams to wear each other out physically and mentally in the rest of this series. Now that it's going 5, it's the only series out of the qualifiers that's going to go 5. Let it be one of the craziest Game 5s we've ever seen then, because that would just benefit the Flyers going forward.
He's Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at Kevin_Durso. The Flyers are going to be facing somebody. We'll find out who that is because of tonight's game. 8 o'clock, 97.3 ESPN, the first round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. We're all along with the ride with Kevin. And Kevin, as all guests, appeared on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Great stuff, Kevin. I appreciate it. It's always good to talk hockey with you.
Absolutely, Josh. Thanks for having me.